Raised on the island of Fortuna, Nero was born to the elder son of Sparta, Virgil, and an unknown woman. However, Virgil left before Nero was born, not even knowing of his existence, and his mother either could not or would not raise him, leaving him in an orphanage where he would be named Nero after the black blanket he was found in. Not much is known about Nero's past before the events of Devil May Cry 4, but what we do know is that at some point he would be taken in by the parents of Credo and Kyrie, sometime before their deaths at the hand of demons. He would then be trained by Credo and would join the Order of the Sword, a religious organization dedicated to the Dark Knight Sparta, despite not believing in the Order's teachings, as a Holy Knight, and would quickly become one of their most skilled members. Shortly before the events of Devil May Cry 4, Nero and Kyrie would be attacked by demons, and during this attack, Nero would be injured, causing his demonic powers to awaken in the form of his Devilbringer, which he began to train himself to use in secret. During the Festival of the Blades, Nero would attempt a ceremony being led by the Order's leader, Sanctus, but during the ceremony, Dante would appear and would assassinate Sanctus. A group of knights would then attempt to confront Dante, but would all be slain. After believing that Kyrie was in danger, Nero would intervene, attacking Dante, and with the use of his Devilbringer was finally able to fight him off. Under orders from Credo, Nero then tracked Dante to Fortuna Castle, where he encountered the Order member Agnes, who revealed to Nero that the Order had been experimenting on and summoning demons, as well as creating the Hellgates using the shattered remnants of the Yamato. During this encounter, Nero would be gravely injured, and after restoring the Yamato, he would awaken to his first Devil Trigger, and would decide to go to the Order's headquarters to get answers. Upon arriving, Nero would be met by Credo, who would reveal that he had orders from a resurrected Sanctus to capture Nero and would transform into a demonic form resembling an angel. The two would then battle and Credo would be defeated, but after the fight, Kyrie would appear and would become frightened upon seeing Nero's Devilbringer for the first time, before being kidnapped by Agnes, resulting in Nero and Credo putting aside their differences and splitting up to search for him. Nero would be the one to find them, and after a rematch with a transformed Agnes, Sanctus would interrupt, taking Kyrie once again. Now enraged, Nero would rampage through the Order's headquarters until meeting Dante once again, with Dante telling Nero that he wanted the Yamato, revealing it to have been his brother's. The two would fight once again, but this time Dante would easily beat Nero, and after the young man would calm down, Dante would allow Nero to keep the sword and go after Sanctus. Nero would then continue, finding Sanctus at the top of a platform, along with a giant dormant demon known as the Savior. Eventually, Nero and Sanctus would then engage each other, and during this battle, Sanctus would take the Yamato and Credo would intervene but would be killed by Sanctus. Nero would then be captured and absorbed into the Savior and would be used as its main power source. Sometime later, Dante would recover the Yamato and would rescue Nero, returning the blade to him. Nero would then find Sanctus inside the Savior and would once again do battle. But this time, Nero would be victorious and would rescue Kyrie. After the two escaped, Sanctus would merge with the Savior, and after a quick fight, would once and for all be destroyed by Nero. Afterwards, Dante would permanently entrust the Yamato to Nero and would leave the two now that his job was done. Ruby Rose was born on the island of Patch to the huntsmen Summer Rose and Taiyang Xiaolong. Unfortunately, around 5 years later, Summer would leave for a mission and never return. And it was shortly after this that Ruby's half-sister, Yang Xiaolong, would discover her biological mother and would take Ruby to search for her. During the search, the two would be attacked by a pack of Grimm, but would be rescued by their uncle, Crow Bronley. These events would inspire Ruby to become a huntress and dedicate her life to protecting others. And about a decade later, after starting her training, Ruby would be involved in a dust robbery where she would fend off the criminal Roman Torchwick, getting the attention of the headmaster of Beacon Academy, Professor Osmond, who would allow Ruby to attend his school 2 years early at the age of 15. During initiation, Ruby would end up partnered with White Schnee before being placed on a team with Blake Belladonna and her sister Yang. This team would be known as RWBY, and RWBY would be appointed leader by Osmond. Sometime later, an argument between Weiss and Blake would lead the team to discover that Roman was working with a terrorist organization known as the White Fang, and stopping Roman and the White Fang would become Team RWBY's goal during their second semester, where they would eventually track the criminal to the overrun settlement of Mountain Glen. They would then be sent by Ozpin on a supposed training mission, and during this mission, RWBY would stumble across Roman's camp and would be briefly captured before her team came to her rescue. Roman would flee in a train meant to bring explosives under the city of Vale, and though the team was able to defeat Roman and his allies, they were unable to stop the explosion, unleashing Grimm into the city, but thankfully the other students of Beacon, as well as the teachers, responded in time and the damage caused was minimal. Roman would be captured and Team RWBY would go on to compete in the Vital Tournament. However, before the tournament would reach its end, Roman's boss, Cinder Fall, would manipulate the contestants, eventually leading to the death of RWBY's friend Penny, and Cinder would once again unleash Grimm onto the city, however in a much larger amount, completely overrunning Vale. While this was going on, Roman would be set free and RWBY would engage in combat with him one final time, where Roman would be killed by a Grimm. RWBY would then make her way to Beacon Tower, where she would arrive just in time to watch her friend Pyranikos be killed by Cinder. This event would cause RWBY to activate her silver eye powers for the first time, nearly killing Cinder and falling into a coma. After awakening, RWBY would discover that her team had been disbanded, Yang had lost an arm, and that Osmond had been killed. However, RWBY would then go on to form a new team with the remaining members of Pyra's old team to form the team known as Ranger, who would then leave for the Kingdom of Mistral. Around 7 months later, now aged 16, RWBY would be tracked down and attacked by Tyrion Kalos, who, after revealing that he and Cinder both worked under a being named Salem, would quickly defeat Team Ranger, but would be fought off with the help of Crow, who had been keeping an eye on RWBY. After recovering, Crow would explain the power of the Four Maidens, beings who could freely use magic and are needed to open a vault containing a relic of the gods. Later, reaching the Kingdom of Mistral, they would meet with the headmaster of Haven Academy, Leo Lionheart. Here, Crow would reveal that his sister and Yang's biological mother, Raven, was in the possession of the Spring Maiden, and though Crow wanted to take the maiden, Leo refused. After a night of drinking, Crow would return with a boy named Oscar Pine, who was sharing his body with the reincarnated Osmond. Crow would then get a message from Lionheart to meet him in a month's time. However, Osmond would suspect foul play and would train Team Ranger himself. During this month, Yang and Weiss would reunite with RWBY, and once the month had passed, the group would return to Haven to find Leo and Raven herself waiting for them. Raven would then create a portal bringing Cinder as well as her group to do battle. During this fight, Blake would return and Cinder would be defeated by Raven, who had been the true Spearing Maiden all along, having used a decoy. After Cinder's defeat, Raven would leave the relic with Osmond's group, having been convinced that it wasn't worth the trouble. The reunited Team RWBY would then take a short break, during which RWBY would turn 17. Now, under instruction from Osmond, the group would make their way to Atlas, boarding a train which would be attacked by Grimm. And in order to keep the passengers safe, Team RWBY as well as Crow and Osmond would lead the Grimm further back, before fighting them further. After dealing with the threats, Osmond's suspicious behavior would lead RWBY to use the Relic of Knowledge to discover the truth, that Osmond and Salem had once been lovers, and that Salem's wrath was the result of Osmond's actions. Now ashamed and being berated from all sides, Osmond would disappear into Oscar's subconscious. After reuniting with the rest of their group in Argus, they would come up with a plan to steal an airship, and would successfully steal one, leaving for Atlas, where they would almost immediately be arrested and would be taken to General James Ironwood, a friend and ally of Osmond's, who would release them and take them under his care, having them train under an elite group of huntsmen called the Aesops. And over the next few months, they would train with the group until a massive Grimm invasion would attack the city of Mantle, and RWBY and her team would defend the city and work to evacuate it. However, once they returned, James would let his paranoia get the better of him after Salem would reveal that she was personally coming to Atlas and would order the evacuation to stop so that Atlas could retreat into the atmosphere where Salem wouldn't be able to reach them. RWBY and her team wouldn't be willing to let the civilians left behind die, however, and would fight their way back to Mantle where the team would split up, with RWBY and her side going to Atlas to warn the world about Salem. And while they would succeed in getting the message out, no backup from the other kingdoms would come, and RWBY and her team would be forced to take matters into their own hands. Attacking and taking down Ironwood and the Aesops, and using the Relic of Creation, they would transport the civilian population of Atlas and Mantle to Vacuo. But during this time, Cinder and Neo would attack, once again killing Penny, who was now the Winter Maiden. And while they did manage to get most of the civilians to safety, one by one, she and her team, along with Jean and Neo, would be thrown from the ledge and into the abyss, where RWBY would wake up on an island where her journey will continue. Hello and welcome everyone to another remake of a previous match. This time tackling my very first fight, but this time around with proper scaling and using a more up-to-date version of RWBY, using her from Volume 8 this time around instead of Volume 6. Meanwhile, I will still be using a once again updated script for Nero from Devil May Cry 4 that will go a little more in depth. This is mainly because even under the rules of Equalized stats, Nero in Devil May Cry 5 would one-shot RWBY. This is because he possesses an ability that would single-handedly win the fight, that being his Ragtime Devil Breaker, which would stop time and prevent RWBY from using her aura. And her aura is where all of her durability comes from, meaning that in order to make that version of Nero a fight instead of a stomp even with Equalized stats, I would need to either limit his arsenal while not touching RWBY's, or shift RWBY's aura durability to her body's durability. And honestly, neither just sit right with me, so I'm just going to be sticking with Devil May Cry 4 Nero for this fight. fight. Now, as I'm sure most of you noticed in the title, this fight will take place under Equalized stats conditions. Now, I'll explain why this has to be this way in the physical abilities, but how it basically works is that I will be boosting one character's physical limits and overall power output in order to reach a similar but slightly below level as the character that is more powerful. In case you were wondering, no, you're not wondering, you know it's RWBY. RWBY's the one that needs to get boosted, everyone knows this. Right, with all that out of the way, let's start by comparing these two physically. During the events of Devil May Cry 4, Nero is a 19-year-old human-demon hybrid, standing at 6 feet 2 inches tall and likely weighing around 200 pounds. Being a member of the Holy Knights, Nero is constantly fighting demons and would need to be in excellent condition, most likely being in his peak physical condition during this point in time. On top of that, Nero's demonic heritage grants him naturally enhanced strength, speed, stamina, and durability. Now, to be clear, I will be adding Nero's feats with the spectral form of his Devilbringer, as even though I don't consider this to be an accurate showing of pure physical strength, it is a natural ability he has access to and is explicitly stated to be the physical manifestation of his demonic power, so I think it should count in this area. Nero is incredibly powerful, having the strength to effortlessly cut down demons that can overpower normal humans with ease. He stopped an Angelo's charge with just a single hand and a book, and just by pulling away from Dante, he cracked a stone wall and has been shown to be able to overpower house-sized demons with just the Red Queen. And using his spectral Devilbringer, he tossed around these same demons like they were ragdolls, and even managed to crush the Savior's face, with the Savior being a kaiju-sized demon that was powered by him and Kyrie directly, and finally could momentarily match and manage to injure Dante, who in his base form could tank attacks from the demon Beowulf, who is stated to strike with the force of a supernova and killed Argosax, whose mere presence was merging the human and demon worlds together, which on its own would place Nero at multiversal in terms of attack potency. But we can actually go even higher if you take statements in Pinnacle of Combat seriously, as in that game, it is stated that souls in Devil May Cry are simple 9th dimensional objects, with the Yamato being explicitly shown to be capable of splitting souls apart. And Dante has probably been hit by this weapon more than any other character, and Nero still managed to injure him in their fight. Nero, much like his father and uncle, is incredibly fast. In fact, much faster than you probably think. He's fast enough to effortlessly dodge bullets fired at point-blank range, can respond to a surprise attack from someone he considered an ally who should scale to his same speed, single-handedly took on groups of demons, and even kept pace with Dante, though by his own admission, Dante had underestimated Nero in their first encounter. However, considering Dante managed to casually defeat the Blitz demon who moves at lightning speeds, and in Devil May Cry 3 casually was able to evade lasers, this would mean that by this point, Dante, and by extension Nero, is easily faster than light. So this is no small feat. Despite only being a quarter demon, Nero can still take a massive amount of damage and continue fighting. This amount was also boosted when he gained the Yamato, as demonic energy was even what resurrected him when he gained its demonic power, as stated in Devil May Cry 5, when he was being stabbed in the chest. On top of that, Nero also has a natural healing factor which allows him to heal from catastrophic damage, such as large blades through the chest and powerful blows from high-powered demons. However, his healing factor is limited and nowhere on the level of his father or Dante. And just like the Sons of Sparta, should Nero take enough damage, he will become weakened and will eventually go down just like everyone else. Currently, Ruby Rose is a 17-year-old human female standing at 5 feet 4 inches tall and likely weighing around 120 pounds. As a huntress, Ruby is constantly going up against the creatures of Grimm and would at the very least need to be in a state comparable to professional athletes simply to survive in her profession. In fact, I wouldn't think it's a stretch to say that Ruby has attained peak physical condition, as she has no issue performing feats that are outright superhuman by our standards. Despite her small size, Ruby is very capable physically. This is best shown by her ability to effortlessly wield her custom scythe even as young as 15, and using it to cut through Grimm with ease. With a single swing of her weapon, she took out a group of White Fang grunts. With assistance from Blake, she cut off an Elysian Paladin's arm, could block strikes from a Grimm, whose name I'm not even going to try and pronounce, which is strong enough to collapse the roof of a church, and with assistance from her partner Weiss, she dragged a Nevermore up the side of a cliff. And finally, she should scale to Yang and Blake, who were able to break Vine's aura and knock him out, with Vine having the power needed to contain an explosion that would have been comparable to this explosion caused by Ozpin. And in the context of the story, this bomb is being used to threaten the entire city of Mantle, which would put RWBY's attack output in the range of large town to small city level. Possibly even higher, but we will stick to this range. What is probably RWBY's greatest strength is her speed, being second only to her teammate Blake in terms of combat speed, and being fast enough to fight groups of Grimm all by herself. She can blitz groups of trained White Fang soldiers, can casually dodge and deflect bullets fired at close range, and finally has kept pace with Mercury Black and Emerald Sestrai in direct combat, with these two being fast enough to dodge air-to-ground lightning and being comparable to Blake, who similarly dodged lightning mid-air as well as keeping pace with several fighters capable of doing the same, even being able to move fast as they can react with the aid of her semblance, as well as Harriet, who had a semblance that also enhances her speed. And with her semblance, as stated a moment ago, she gained a speed boost that allowed her to move faster than her opponent can react. And while rarely shown in show, it has been shown multiple times that she can attack while using this, meaning that it is not limited to purely travel speed and she can fight at these levels. While only having a couple examples of RWBY's durability limit, we do have enough to scale roughly where she'd be at, as her aura has only been shown to break a handful of times during the series. She tanked hits from a Grimm which could collapse the roof of a church. Her aura has tanked being sent flying by Neo and a similar hit by Mercury. She was unharmed after falling from a height so far up she couldn't see the bottom. A surprised fireball from Cinder Fall, and the times her aura has actually been broken are more impressive. Once during her fight with Tyrion, who was strong enough to match her Uncle Crow, who casually blocked a strike that would create a crater under him. And once when she caused an explosion that destroyed the arm of a giant mech which was created to fight kaiju-sized Grimm. And finally, after being hit in the back with Cinder's magic. And Cinder scaling above the explosion that I referenced before. And even if you don't buy that Cinder was attacking at this level, RWBY should still scale to Neo, Pre-Made Winter, and the Aesops, who all survived being within close proximity to this explosion. And once again, Vine, who RWBY is similarly comparable to, straight up contained and severely dampened a similar explosion, though this was at the cost of his own life. However, it should be noted that without her aura protecting and healing her, RWBY would be just as vulnerable to damage as any other human. And here's the part where I explained why this video is stats equalized, because dear God does RWBY get her little Red Riding Hood ass handed to her otherwise. Starting with strength and durability, since they are connected when there's a lot of scaling involved, RWBY is horribly outclassed. Sure, she has some feats that visually look comparable, such as both of them being able to physically overpower large monsters, but once you start taking lore into account and scaling, the difference becomes very apparent. To demonstrate, I'm going to highball RWBY as much as I possibly can and place her at one level above city level, placing her at mountain level, despite not having the feats or scaling for it. RWBY is still severely outclassed, as Nero can damage Dante, who killed Argosax in just his base form, with Argosax's mere presence merging the human and demon worlds, which, with this statement taken only at face value or lowballed, this would put Nero at multi-planetary levels of attack potency and durability. And this is him lowballed. On average, he's multiversal, and if you take statements made in Pinnacle of Combat seriously, he's around 9th dimensional. The speed difference isn't quite as massive, but it's still far too large for RWBY to keep up with. Starting with RWBY, she comes out at relativistic by using the return stroke of a lightning bolt, which is the speed I most commonly see lightning placed at. So using this, RWBY could be faster than light, but only with her semblance. However, considering we have no statements or feats that explicitly put her on this level that are consistent, we really can't place her at this level. But for the sake of this comparison, let's say that she is. She would still be far too slow for Nero. Dante, by the events of the first game chronologically, Devil May Cry 3, was already faster than Light. possibly before even getting his Devil Trigger. And Nero, before getting his Devil Trigger, was able to keep up with and even contend with Devil May Cry 4 Dante, who is massively faster than Light, even casually. And Nero received a massive speed boost to his base stats after getting his Devil Trigger just like Dante did. So for the sake of this video actually being a fight, I will be bumping RWBY up to just under Nero in all of these areas to give her a fighting chance, but still giving Nero the edge in physical abilities. Nero will be bringing 3 weapons into this engagement: his custom greatsword, the Red Queen, his Blue Rose revolver, and his father's katana, the Yamato. At around 5.5 feet in length from the tip of the blade to the butt of the handle, the Red Queen is Nero's primary weapon and a custom greatsword based off the Holy Knight's standard weapon, but equipped with a fuel injection system that adds power to his blows as well as setting the blade on fire. At first, the Red Queen would need to be charged to be used up to its maximum effect, but Nero would later upgrade the weapon and allowing it to charge up if he timed the swing of his blade and the trigger for the system just right. The Blue Rose revolver is based off of a Smith & Wesson Model 500 double action revolver, but was customized to have a more traditional 6-shot cylinder, as well as being equipped with a second barrel allowing Nero to fire 2 shots at once, with an effective range of roughly 165 feet or roughly 50 meters, and a custom rate of fire allowing Nero to fire as rapidly as he wants. Nero can also channel his demonic energy into the revolver, massively increasing its damage output, but this does require time to charge, and while doing so, Nero cannot use the weapon. But Nero's most dangerous weapon is easily the Yamato, a katana-like sword around 3 feet in length that has been said to be able to cut through anything. Though I personally believe that this ability is found in the weapon's magic rather than the blade itself, as while the blade can be stopped by other devil arms and even Levy's rocket launcher, the weapon's magic can cut apart the very fabric of reality and even split Virgil's soul in half. And once again, if you take Pinnacle of Combat seriously, souls in Devil May Cry are said to be 9th dimensional. RWBY will be bringing 1 weapon into this matchup, her handmade scythe sniper rifle hybrid dubbed Crescent Rose. In its standard form, Crescent Rose from the muzzle to the end of its stem is around 6 feet in total length, making the weapon bigger than its user, with the curved blade being roughly 4 feet long. The tip of the stem also has a pointed tip allowing for a second point to attack from, and should the worst case scenario happen and the weapon be broken, she could still use the end to easily defend herself. In Atlas, RWBY would have her weapon upgraded, allowing her to rotate the blade with the press of a button and allowing her to use it with even greater ease, as well as an added war scythe function that folds the blade forward, allowing it to function similarly to a spear. Crescent Rose's secondary mode is its rifle mode, which takes the form of a medium-sized bolt-action sniper rifle which fires dust rounds. RWBY has been shown to use 3 different types of dust ammunition: fire dust, which works as an incendiary round, electric dust, which will shock opponents on top of shooting them, and gravity dust, which is the heaviest hitting type of ammunition she carries and has the added effect of increasing the recoil of her shot, which is especially useful with Crescent Rose's scythe form, as she regularly fires mid-swing to increase the speed of her shots or simply enhance her mobility in combat. Basing the range off of modern sniper rifles, Crescent Rose would have a range of roughly 1,200 meters or 3,900 feet. And with the rate of fire being a bolt-action rifle, this weapon can be used as fast as she can operate it. Both Nero and RWBY's weapons, with the exception of Yamato, are all custom made to take advantage of the user's strengths, with RWBY's even being built from scratch. And this actually makes comparing these weapons rather hard, as they were specifically designed to take advantage of their strengths and mitigate their weaknesses. And in fact, I don't think the advantage will be found in that, as both weapons have built-in methods to increase the speed and strength of their attacks respectively. In terms of range, Crescent Rose beats all 3 of Nero's weapons, being longer than both of his melee weapons, at a minimum having a foot range over Red Queen and 3 feet over Yamato, and being a sniper rifle granting far more range than his revolver, quite literally over 1,000 meters more and over 3,000 more feet, also blowing Yamato's shown magic range out of the water as well. In terms of firepower, Nero's revolver can dish out enough damage to harm even high-tier demons, such as Dante and a Sparta Amp Sanctus. Now, thanks to this being equalized stats, you'd think I would just say that RWBY's standard ammunition is now a part of Nero's, and you'd be right. It's equal to his standard ammunition, not his shots amped with demonic energy. So with RWBY having range and Nero still having firepower on his side, this basically comes down to rate of fire. However, even then, that still evens out. With their base shots, Nero should have a slightly higher rate of fire thanks to Blue Rose being far simpler weapon to ready a shot with, while Ruby would need to put in more motion to ready a round in its chamber. Unfortunately for Nero, his demonic shots on the other hand take far more time to ready up, meaning that Ruby's more powerful ammunition would have a higher rate of fire than Nero's. Ruby's weapon also serves her chosen fighting styles better. I'll try not to get too far ahead of myself, but thanks to Crescent Rose's size compared to her own, it makes it easier for Ruby to defend herself with and take advantage of its larger size for power blows or evasive maneuvers, even allowing her to spin around the weapon or fire it to throw herself out of the way of the attack. Now, the Yamato is a unique case, as if it were being used by Dante or Virgil, it alone would take this category due to its demonic abilities, specifically its ability to carve through souls, being explicitly shown to be capable of splitting one in half. However, these showings are from a far more experienced and demonic user, specifically Virgil. Nero, while showing that he can use the weapon's more basic demonic powers, has not shown any use of this weapon on Virgil's level, specifically using it as a backup weapon, virtually using it the same way he'd use Red Queen or as a weapon for his Devil Trigger, and quite frankly, it is more useful to him as a source of power than as a held weapon. Overall, Ruby actually takes this thanks to her ranged weapon and more applicable integration of her weapon into her fighting style, with Nero's arsenal just matching her in other areas due to this fight taking place under equal stats. So, I give Ruby the edge in weapons and equipment. As a human-demon hybrid, Nero has natural access to several magical abilities as well as some granted to him by the Yamato. The Devil Bringer is Nero's right arm and is the physical manifestation of his demonic power. He can use it to pull his enemies closer to, as well as bring himself to them, can create a giant spectral version to grab onto and slam enemies around like ragdolls. The Devil Bringer is also incredibly durable, taking several direct hits from Dante's Rebellion without so much as a reaction from Nero, and in fact, the only weapon that is pierced his arm is the Yamato, which, as I've stated several times in this video, is 9th dimensional. Nero's body will naturally heal itself, and after absorbing the Yamato, this ability was boosted, granting Nero the ability to heal from even mortal injuries. And while it has been said that demons can regenerate from losing both their bodies and souls, or even both at once, it has also been shown that demons in the series, including Nero himself according to Devil May Cry 5, can be killed. However, I don't think this is a flat-out contradiction. In my eyes, it's entirely possible that death is simply a temporary setback for demons in the series, and that they simply revive after a certain amount of time. As stated literally one sentence ago, Nero absorbed the Yamato into his Devil Bringer, allowing him to summon it at will or use its demonic energy to enhance his abilities. One way he did this was by channeling the Yamato's power into the Red Queen, which he could then release as either a simple energy slash or as a pair. Nero could also summon the blade itself before charging up its energy and then unleashing a devastating series of strikes meant to bring down an opponent. Another power granted to Nero by absorbing the Yamato is a form I call the Proto-Devil Trigger. Unlike a normal Devil Trigger, or even one used by standard demons, this form creates a large spectral demon that attacks with him using the Yamato. This form does act similarly to other Devil Triggers, granting the user enhanced strength, speed, stamina, and durability, as well as the ability to actively heal at a greater rate than normal. However, it's my belief that the added buffs given to Nero are much weaker than the buffs Dante or Virgil would receive. And finally, the last power given to Nero through his Devil Trigger are his summoned swords, which he mostly uses as a secondary projectile while he fires the Blue Rose. As a huntress, Ruby will have two powers that come naturally to her, and one exclusive to people like her with silver eyes. The first of her abilities is called Aura, which is the manifestation of her soul, and it has a wide range of uses. Aura's main purpose is acting as a sort of force field, protecting the user as well as their equipment, allowing them to take serious damage without any physical injury or malfunction in their tools. This means that before Ruby is defeated, her aura will need to be broken. Aura can also be used offensively, either being channeled through the weapons or the user themselves. Another use for Aura is healing one's wounds, giving the user a limited healing factor, and with enough Aura, even fatal injuries can be recovered from. In RWBY, a semblance is, to put it bluntly, a personal superpower that one can access so long as they have Aura, but that will also use it up if given enough use. RWBY's semblance is transforming into a cyclone of rose petals, according to Penny, breaking down her and anyone she uses on its molecular structure and reforming it. This has the added effect of greatly increasing her speed, allowing her to move much faster, being capable of blitzing her opponents. In combat, she mainly uses her semblance to dodge, even splitting apart to evade attacks more easily, or getting close before attacking or retreating. RWBY has also used her semblance to attack on a few occasions, most notably during her trailer back before the series had officially started and during the first episode of Volume 7. However, she only does this on a few occasions, though any reasoning as to why would be pure speculation on my part. Though the point still stands that it's not her standard use of the power, but one ability she did gain through training was flight, allowing her to seemingly fly freely as shown in Volume 8. And finally, we get to the power that I really wish had a better name, her Silver Eye powers. An ability exclusively dangerous to Grimm and can blind, turn them to stone, or even outright vaporize them. Okay, so this category, just like the last time I did this fight, is still very easy to see who wins. But the gap has actually closed a bit, mainly due to this being equalized stats and some very unclear at best power boosts, but also RWBY canonically learning to use her abilities much more effectively since I last used her. Let's get the easy one right out of the way. With equalized stats, both Nero's regeneration and RWBY's aura being tied to their durability, these powers are equal because of the very nature of this matchup. Sticking with the easy examples for a moment longer, RWBY's Silver Eyes will not play a role in this fight. Nero isn't a Grimm and it won't hurt him. Now, getting into the actual comparisons, let's start with Nero's Devilbringer and RWBY's semblance. First off, Nero's right arm has the advantage of being far better for inflicting damage, as its spectral form increases the damage it can inflict and its size, which allows him to more easily attack in a larger area. However, it doesn't really give him a speed increase, so much like Nero's damage increase, RWBY's semblance is uncontested in that area, which means that the advantage between these powers falls into their other uses. In terms of closing the distance, I'd easily go with RWBY's semblance, as it has far better mobility capabilities. While Nero's arm can just pull him to his opponents or them to himself, and it has been shown that people faster than himself can evade the Devilbringer's grab, which RWBY's semblance would allow her to do with ease, giving her more freedom with its boost in mobility options, quite literally letting her fly. Not only making it better for mobility, but mitigating the damage he'd do with his attacks, as she could much more easily evade thanks to allowing her to split apart. Which also means that even the Devilbringer's defensive capabilities of being basically impenetrable by normal means isn't something that RWBY can't account for and counter with the exact same methods, just moving around his guard. But Nero's Devil Trigger would let him be faster than her, right? Well, yes, base to base, but we need to look at what would be faster between the Devil Trigger speed boost and with the speed boost gained by RWBY's semblance themselves. And there's an issue with trying to compare these. Neither has a confirmed number on how much they affect the user. Hell, we don't even know how much a normal Devil Trigger amplifies the user's abilities. And even if we did, we still don't have a number on how much speed RWBY is given by her semblance. All we know is that it gives RWBY enough speed to move faster than people on her same level of speed can react. It could be 10 times as fast, it could make her twice as fast. So without any concrete information, I have to assume that the boost gained by these powers are equal, even if I personally don't believe that statement. But that doesn't end there, as RWBY also has an ability that allows her to increase the strength of her strikes with her aura's ability to boost physical attacks. And it has been shown that the increase is significant enough to be considered a multiplier. So yeah, once again, due to no definitive information on this boost or the strength boost given by Nero's Devil Trigger, I'll be treating them as though they're equal as well, because I don't have a number to go off. Now, for the record, even if I didn't go down this route, it really wouldn't change anything, as I actually believe RWBY's speed boost is greater than the Devil Trigger's, and that Nero's strength boost from the Devil Trigger would be greater than RWBY's aura boost. So nothing would really change, as we still don't have a definitive answer. RWBY would just be faster and Nero would be stronger, so I still couldn't say what gives a better physical boost. They would just even each other out. Okay, so real fast, I found this after recording the last segment, but according to a guidebook from Devil May Cry 1, apparently the Devil Trigger is a 2x multiplier. Now, I'm not going to be using this for several reasons. A, Nero's Devil Trigger isn't the same as Dante's. B, this could have been retconned since then. And C, we still don't have a number on RWBY's multiplier, so it doesn't matter. But I did just want to acknowledge this and let you guys know that I'm aware of it. Now, here's the part that's going to get me crucified. Assuming that the boosts given are equal, RWBY's physical boosts are actually better. Now, without equal stats, it wouldn't actually matter if all of RWBY's abilities gave her better multipliers than Nero's, as he's just that much stronger that he wouldn't need any boost to keep up with RWBY. But with equal stats and treating these boosts as though they're equal, RWBY is going to be able to use her physical boosts more than Nero, as unlike Nero's demonic energy needing to build up over a fight, RWBY can access these abilities at any point so long as she still has her aura, which means that she's going to be able to use these abilities more often than Nero. And in case you're wondering, yes, this still applies if I said Nero's strength increase was better. In fact, it would be worse for Nero, as it meant that RWBY could simply be faster than Nero's Devil Trigger throughout the entirety of his use in that form. However, that's where RWBY's upsides ends, and to put this into perspective, yes, even boosts do count as her upsides here. Starting off, Nero's Devil Trigger gives his healing factor a major boost, meaning that with this state, his healing factor will be superior to her aura. There's also the Proto Devil Trigger's ability to hit consecutively with Nero, which RWBY doesn't have an answer for in her power set, meaning that she's gonna have to spend time and aura evading these strikes with her semblance to force space between them, which, depending on the circumstance, could actually just be more advantageous to just dig in her heels and defend. Keeping with the advantages gained by the Devil Trigger state, RWBY has no answer for Nero's Blade Beams, as unlike her uncle and teammate Blake, RWBY has not shown the use of this ability, granting Nero both an ability she doesn't have, and even if she did, the Blade Beams are explicitly stated to be from Yamato, meaning that they would be stronger regardless of all that on top of his summoned swords. While under the conditions of equalized stats, RWBY can certainly hold her own much better against Nero thanks to them both having some nebulous increases in their boosts, and a better toolset with her semblance against the Devilbringer, but RWBY's powers still aren't equal to the Devil Trigger state. At the bare minimum, Nero takes this area due to variety in his abilities, as RWBY's powers just don't give her enhanced healing or an increase in her number of powers. And so, I grant Nero the edge in special abilities. Like in all of my matches, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how both of these opponents approach combat with their particular styles. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. Nero was trained by Credo, the leader of the Order of the Sword's Holy Knight Division, and by the events of Devil May Cry 4 was considered by some to be the Order's best fighter, and later proved this, defeating his mentor in single combat and holding his own against Dante in their initial encounter when all other members were defeated in a single blow. As someone who is trained to deal with hordes of demons on a regular basis, Nero would need to specialize in Shicho, a simple style designed for use against groups of opponents using wide swings of a weapon to hit as many opponents as possible, with one attack often and best used against groups of lesser skilled opponents. Mostly considered a beginner or novice form, this combat style was very effective against lesser trained or ill-equipped combatants, allowing a single well-trained user to cut through hordes of opponents. Next up is Gem So, which was a combat style with a focus on defending until you can spot an opening and then counterattack, primarily being defined by its power blows, but it seems to me that Nero uses a variation of Gem So which focuses on dodging rather than defense. In fact, Nero has no dedicated defensive options in combat, instead preferring to avoid attacks outright. This form would be Nero's primary combat style against actually skilled fighters, allowing him to use his immense strength to its fullest advantage while still using actual skill and less like a berserker fighting style. Nero's approach to combat is essentially to overpower and physically dominate his opponent. In fact, I've seen his fighting style described as taking the moveset of forms 1 and 5 with the mentality of form 7, which I think describes Nero perfectly. While he has been shown to be able to adapt over the course of a battle, he has also had issues when an opponent can't be overpowered, or is trying to outfight him rather than overpower him, like simple demons would, as shown in his second fight with Dante, who was able to toy with him after recognizing how powerful Nero was, and when Sanctus used Kyrie to stop his assault, using his emotions against him. However, this isn't to say that Nero is stupid or a simple-minded combatant. He has shown the ability to recognize the basic weaknesses of opponents and openings of his opponent and exploit them for greater damage. However, he just doesn't seem to care about any more complex strategies than that in combat. And honestly, who can blame him? When you're as strong as he is, you really don't need strategy against the vast majority of opponents. RWBY was trained personally by Crow Bronwyn, one of, if not the best Huntrin currently active in her story, and by the age of 15, she was so skilled that Beacon's headmaster allowed her to skip 2 years of combat training and even appointed her leader of a team, and has also spent the last 2 years honing her skills as an active huntress, even officially becoming one at 17, 4 years earlier than a normal student would even graduate. As a huntress, Ruby would be under the impression that she would be facing large groups of untrained enemies with the Grim Hordes, and as such, Ruby would have had to at least be proficient in Form 1 Sheet Show. This form specialized in long, sweeping motions best used against multiple opponents at once, but this form can also be countered by a single, well-trained opponent as it leaves openings with its long, wide swings. As such, she would balance this out with the Form 5 variation Gem So, a form used for defending and then immediately counterattacking. Often used to smash through an opponent's guard rather than work around it, Ruby's Scythe actually makes the use of this form far easier for multiple reasons. Firstly, the length of this weapon makes it far easier to block strikes due to the length being longer than her own body, which would allow her to position herself in front of a blow much easier. And the recoil from this weapon's shots allowing her to attack faster and harder, which would make her counterattacks far easier to land. However, watching her fight, it seems to me that where Ruby would really specialize is in her use of Form 4 Ataru, which actually plays into her speed. Ataru as a combat style was an aggressive combat form relying on a combination of speed and agility. Practitioners of Ataru were almost always on the offensive, attacking with wide and fast swings and performing amazing feats of acrobatics, such as somersaults and backflips, not only for attack, but also to evade the slashes and strikes of their opponents. Ruby would personalize this form with her weapon, using it for leverage or as a platform to swing her body around it, both keeping her momentum and allowing her to more easily incorporate melee attacks not involving her weapon, which she was trained to be able to fall back on in Volume 5. Tactically, Ruby seems to be naturally gifted, able to come up with plans on the fly to bring down superior combatants, as well as threats far more powerful than her team. The most obvious example of this was her plan to take down the Nevermore in Volume 1, where she used Blake and Weiss's abilities, two people who she had just met the day before and had barely seen in combat, to bring down the Grim. There's also the team attacks that she came up with that combined the abilities of her team for much more effective results. Ruby's also a bit of an opportunistic fighter, searching for or creating openings in her opponent's guard to take them out in a fight. She's done this to Tyrion, using his attack on her uncle to land a blow that removed his stinger from his tail, used Harriet's anger against her and dividing up the Aesops further, preventing them from using team tactics like they prefer to, and forcing a series of smaller engagements like Team RWBY prefers to. And she's done it to Neo twice, once using her overcompetence as weapon, as well as the environment to remove Neo from the fight, as well as to use her position in Volume 8 to reverse an advantage Neo had over her, and put her in a position where she was at Ruby's mercy. However, there have also been instances that have shown that she can be a bit impulsive in fights, primarily when putting herself in danger will benefit others. First shown when she charged in to fight a Deathstalker at initiation, or used the cannon arm of Corvin's mech to bring it down, but severely damaged herself in the process. Well, deja vu. This category is very familiar because it's basically the same as before, except this is the only category where the gap has actually widened between the two, both for Ruby's training enhancing her skills as a combatant, and my grown understanding of Nero's fighting style, where unlike the original matchup, I now believe that the effectiveness of his custom fighting style is reliant on some major advantages he either doesn't have or aren't wide enough to be used fully to his favor thanks to this taking place under Equalized stats. Starting with their uses of Sheet Show, even though I don't think it will play a major factor in this fight, I would still say that Nero has the advantage, mainly due to his status as a primarily solo combatant. While true, Ruby is also skilled with his combat style and has a similar amount of experience, with both being trained from a young age, her last 2 years of combat experience has been with a team, meaning that she would have a group of fighters watching her back in large-scale engagements, which would also allow her to much more easily use this combat style, while Nero had to fight like this solo, making him far more aware of its strengths and weaknesses. Now, Gem So is just the opposite, and not for the reasons you'd think either. Nero's strength advantage would make his power blows more effective, and Red Queen's Exceed ability at worst matches Ruby's recoil boost to strength. So why am I putting Nero's use under Ruby's? Simple, he's using it wrong. Gem So users operate best when they dig their heels in and stonewall opponents with a powerful offensive and defensive mix until the opportunity to counterattack appears. The issue is that Nero strops defense for evasion. Now, normally that wouldn't be an issue considering that even with stats equalized, Nero would be faster, but here's the thing, RWBY's weapon is better for taking advantage of this form's strengths, including the ability to attack faster, and more importantly, she can increase her own speed at any point in this fight. And while true, Nero can do the same with his Devil Trigger, unlike RWBY's semblance, Nero needs to build up his demonic power, and truth be told, this energy has far better uses than just trying to keep up with RWBY, and he would probably know this. Finally, we have RWBY's use of Ataru, which I personally think would be more effective than Nero's custom Gemso variation, mainly due to the fact that Nero is trying to utilize a speed-based combat tactics with a power-based combat style, while RWBY is simply utilizing her speed for a speed-based fighting style, meaning that she's gonna have a far easier time landing blows with this style, as it already implements maneuvers aggressively that Nero would try to use evasively. There's also the fact from before that RWBY can implement her speed boost more often than Nero can with his Devil Trigger, meaning that more often than not, she's gonna be faster. Tactical abilities really isn't even. While true, Nero has a decent understanding of combative strategy, as he simply wouldn't have survived so long if he hadn't, it's just not on the same level as RWBY's, and to be blunt, is rather basic comparatively. Comparatively, RWBY needing to manage the strengths and weaknesses of her teammates gives her far more experience in planning combative maneuvers. Now, I just want to be clear, none of this is to say that Nero would be helpless in terms of his combative abilities, as just like RWBY, he has held his own against fighters far more skilled with himself, and honestly has far more impressive showings compared to RWBY when fighting people better than himself. However, just because he can hold his own against people who are better fighters than him, doesn't really undo the fact that RWBY has basically every advantage in this area outside of Shicho. There's also the fact that Nero on a fundamental level just suffers in a fight with equalized stats, as his combative style revolves around physically dominating his opponents, where here he'll just have a slight physical advantage over RWBY. And so I give RWBY the edge in combat skills and tactics. Now, with all that out of the way, let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place in the outskirts of Atlas during the time skip in Volume 7, and that RWBY has been assigned on a scouting mission to gather information on reports of a human-Grin hybrid in the area. This supposed hybrid is of course Nero, on another fetch quest for Dante that he's convinced Dante just didn't want to bother with because of the cold. And when RWBY finally finds him, stealth not being her best area, accidentally makes her presence known. She quickly radios in and very loudly asks for a prisoner transport for the hybrid, causing Nero to shoot her scroll from her hand. Nero keeps his gun aimed at RWBY, a little hesitant to just start shooting at a human, but RWBY quickly makes that choice for him when she draws crescent rows from her back and aims at it. The pair both fire off a shot at one another at the same time, but neither shot lands, with both evading and continuing to fire on each other. Nero quickly grows impatient at the stalemate between them and pulls Red Queen from his back, rushing in and tanking the shots from RWBY's rifle. And now in melee range, Nero takes a swing at the young huntress, but wasn't expecting her weapon to transform and is taken off guard by a slash to the chest. RWBY capitalizes on this opening, using the recoil of a shot to get a second hit in before Nero can jump to the side, clutching his chest as it heals. Almost immediately, Nero begins his counterattack, lashing out with a series of heavy blows that RWBY is just managing to block each strike that Nero lays into her, and eventually, seeing an opening, delivers a right hook with his Devil Bringer that rocks RWBY, sending her stumbling back a few feet. By the time she recovers, Nero has already swung his sword and giving it a powerful revving, charging up Exceed just before it makes contact with RWBY. The strike sending the smaller fighter flying as she lands, feeling dazed from the blow. Nero, on the other hand, doesn't plan on letting up and sends his Devil Bringer her way in an attempt to drag her back into melee range. However, RWBY actually had the same idea. Using her semblance, she breaks apart, evading the demonic limb and rushing past the Devil Hunter faster than he can react, getting in several slashes into his back by spinning her weapon. Nero grits his teeth through the pain and turns, swinging his blade at RWBY, who evades just in time by using Crescent Roads as a platform, spinning around and kicking Nero in the jaw. RWBY follows this up by using her scythe to knock Nero's legs out from under him. However, Nero, already having been thoroughly pissed off by his opponent, reaches out with the Devil Bringer and grabs RWBY by the face, bringing her down with him as he slams her face first into the ground as he lands on his back. The teens both groan and start getting to their feet, Nero feeling particularly irritated. However, he also can't shake the feeling that there's something familiar about his opponent. He's confident he'd never fought this girl before, but there was an unmistakable familiarity to her attacks and powers, one that he just couldn't place his finger on. You getting a sense of deja vu too, or is it just me? He asked, rolling onto his knees, while Ruby gives him a confused stare, but can't deny the feeling of familiarity from her opponent as well. Biting her tongue, Ruby readies herself, having a very strong feeling that she can't take any chances with him. Well, I guess it doesn't matter, Nero says before shrugging and revving up Red Queen once again. You're still going down! And with that, Nero goes to re-engage. However, Ruby doesn't meet him head on, instead playing defense, using a mixture of her semblance and spinning herself around Crescent Rose to evade his attacks, staying just out of his range while using her better range with her scythe to land a few slashes. Nero, while not too worried about the light damage he's taking from this tactic, knows he needs to do something to get her back in the melee range. And getting in as close as he can, he tanks the damage from Ruby's blows and waits for the opportunity to grab her scythe with his Devil Bringer. And the second he gets the chance, he jumps back just in time and using the Spectral Devil Bringer, grabs a hold of her weapon and with a powerful pull, forces the young huntress forward, stumbling right into an upward swing from the Red Queen, which he once again powers up with Exceed at the last second, throwing Ruby into the air. Nero tries to capitalize on what he assumes will be a helpless opponent and reaches out once again with his Devil Bringer to slam Ruby into the ground. But at the last second, she uses her semblance to once again move around the attack, actually moving along Nero's arm and over his shoulder to his back, and slamming her weapon down into his shoulder, forcing Nero to rip himself off the blade, now seeing red and turning around with a heavy overhead blow with his sword. However, leaving himself open just like Ruby wanted him to, and using both her aura and the recoil boost of Crescent Rose to move faster than him, while also increasing the power of her attacks to just lay into him, with a series of blows far faster and stronger than what he had grown used to over the course of the fight, leaving him unable to recover and being forced to tank the damage. By the end of Ruby's onslaught, Nero can feel his healing factor start to slow down as the damage he's taken starts catching up with him. Ruby also notices this, and goes in for one last power blow to try and seal the deal, only for Nero to suddenly reach out with a newfound burst of speed and grab the blade with his Devil Bringer before it hits him, as blue, demonic energy starts radiating off of him and his eyes start glowing red. Ruby tries to rip her weapon from his grasp, pouring her aura into her strength and fires the weapon to aid it, but Nero doesn't even budge, and Ruby is too distracted to notice his energy has been channeling into his blade until it's too late, and Nero hits her with a sword beam. However, before she's even pushed back by the blow, Nero's Spectral Demon delivers a follow-up identical attack with Yamato, sending a second one into her. Flying back, Ruby hits the ground hard, sliding along the ground as her aura starts to flicker from the damage she's taken. Getting to her feet, she doesn't have the time to recover as Nero has already closed the distance, and now very cautious of Nero's newfound power, Ruby uses her semblance to once again try and blitz past him, but now Nero is more than capable of evading and blocking these blows. However, he really takes her off guard when he doesn't even bother reacting and just tanks the attacks, letting himself heal much faster than before, and uses the opportunity to take a few swings that Ruby barely manages to dodge herself before they clash weapons, and Nero instantly capitalizes on his stopped opponent, delivering an uppercut that throws Ruby into the air, and Nero begins to ready the Yamato, pouring his demonic power into the blade as Ruby catches herself in midair and fires, throwing herself back down to attack as Nero cuts upwards. Both attacks connect, Ruby's scythe impaling Nero in the chest, while Nero actually manages to cut right through Ruby's aura, as well as cutting Crescent Rose in half while still delivering a cut all the way from her hip up to her shoulder. Ruby, now panicking from feeling her aura get completely bypassed, grabs the top half of Crescent Rose and fires, throwing herself back with a recoil. Nero drops to the ground, using the Red Queen to hold himself up as the scythe is ripped from his chest. Still healing, but once again at a slower rate as his Devil Trigger gives out, most of the energy having been spent by the attacks and not enough time having passed to finish fully healing. Ruby's wound heal as well, but also at a much slower rate as she can feel her aura just about to give out. Both fighters get to their feet for one last push, Nero readying Red Queen as Ruby activates the War Scythe function of Crescent Rose. The two bum rush each other. Nero going for a strike first, but this attack is deflected by Ruby's War Scythe, and Ruby uses the opening to plunge the spiked end of her weapon into Nero's chest before spinning around his back one last time, now using her semblance to slam her shoulder into Nero's back while stabbing him with the blade, taking him to the floor. Ruby's aura finally gives out as she shakily gets up, pulling the halves of her weapon from Nero, who tries to push himself up off the ground but fails, collapsing as he breathes heavily, his healing factor keeping him alive but having used too much energy to keep going or resist as Ruby handcuffs him just as her transport finally arrives. And with that, I declare Ruby Rose, the silver-eyed huntress the winner. Now, as usual with fights with equalized stats, I'm going to repeat this one more time, mainly because I have the analytics to prove that a good portion of my audience skips to the results, and say that this fight takes place under the condition of equalized stats. The only other way RWBY is even close to Nero's level is if you use a composite form that includes the version from BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, where she is strong enough to damage Elizabeth and Margaret, who both have outer versal scaling. So, I'm gonna be honest. When I teased a different outcome for these remakes, this wasn't the fight I was talking about. In fact, this video was supposed to come out like a week earlier, but going over how these two compare without the massive power difference that's normally present, I went from thinking that Nero would still take it, though with much more difficulty, to thinking that RWBY would just barely get out of victory. The main reasons for my opinion changing in an equalized setting is for multiple reasons. Firstly, I think current RWBY is far better at using her skill set than before. Originally, I based RWBY's competency with her semblance on her fight with Roman. However, since then, she's improved the use of this power and has been shown to use it very effectively mid-combat. First of all, while yes, RWBY's advantages have less variety than Nero's, she's going to be able to use them more consistently, as RWBY can draw from her aura at any point in a fight, while Nero needs to build up demonic power. Now true, this means that when Nero inflicts any damage, it will also cut into reserves of her powers and durability, but thanks to her skill set, she's gonna be able to avoid far more often than she'll be taking hits. Nero's primary power set all revolves around inflicting damage, while RWBY's primary power set revolves around avoiding damage. Now, if this was base speed versus base speed with these abilities, Nero would still win, as even with equalized stats, evading will only buy so much time, and eventually, he's gonna land the hits he needs. However, RWBY's speed increase is directly tied to these evasive abilities, meaning now Nero has to try and play catch up to evasive abilities that he'd have to tap into his own demonic power just to keep up with, which would lessen the amount of time he has to inflict the damage he needs. Equalizing powers also greatly negates Nero's trump card significantly, as it means that with no definitive multiplier for any of these powers, I have no way of determining who's getting a better boost. In fact, even if one character did have a definitive power boost, I would have to assume the other is equal due to the fact that it's so vague. However, even going with my gut assumption that Nero's Devil Trigger is slower but stronger than RWBY's abilities, nothing really changes. Even in the scenario where her boosts are fully equal to Nero, she's not going to try and overpower him. Her combative style is built around her speed, and in fact, with the scenario that RWBY's semblance is faster than the Devil Trigger's boost, that's actually a worse outcome for Nero, specifically because of this, as she'd have a much easier time evading his more powerful attacks, which would only serve to waste his built-up demonic power. Even the Devil Trigger's ability to attack consecutively isn't a massive edge here, as RWBY's combative style and weapon mixed with her semblance gives her plenty of options to block and evade these attacks. Secondly, a fight with equalized stats really hurts Nero combatively speaking, as his approach to combat isn't to outfight his opponents, but to overwhelm them physically with power blows. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't have any skill. I don't think I need to argue that he clearly does, but the fact of the matter is that his entire combative approach is built around the assumption that he's going to be naturally far superior to his opponent, to the point that we've actually seen him suffer in combat when this isn't the case. In fact, we've never seen Nero defeat a significant opponent because he was the more skilled fighter. Every single one of his notable victories was due to his overwhelming power. In fact, we see that Dante was able to completely toy with Nero once he understood how powerful Nero was, when before, Nero was able to defeat Dante based on this power alone. And it doesn't help that while Nero is skilled, RWBY is better with the majority of areas. She's a better strategist, and when it comes down to their main combat style for skilled opponents, RWBY uses her version better than Nero. Now, Nero's custom evasion-based gem So isn't some kiss of death for him combatively, but its effectiveness completely revolves around being faster than his opponent. And unfortunately for Nero, RWBY's semblance is the perfect counter to this. Not to mention her weapon being better built for defensive and counter-attack based combat style, all on top of an aggressive speed-based combat style, which would really put his custom style at a disadvantage. Now, Nero absolutely could win this fight. In fact, either way in an equalized setting is gonna be a close call. I just think that RWBY has slightly better odds when the stats are equalized. To once again reiterate, under normal circumstances, Nero doesn't just win, he solos her verse at the start of Devil May Cry 4. Similarly, Devil May Cry 5 Nero would win. In fact, it's not even up for debate really. he'd one-shot her even with equalized stats. The reason for this is that his range of abilities has widened to include time manipulation, which would make quick work of RWBY considering that Aura requires active activation. However, his skill set and abilities has also been enhanced, as that version also implements Ataru-style combat maneuvers that would play into his more effective combat style better than his Devil May Cry 4 moveset. And while I don't think his growth as a fighter would make him more skilled than RWBY, mainly seeing as she's still a smarter fighter, but it would let him hold his own longer, and the widened and more powerful than before abilities would allow him to get the victory in my eyes. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that under the conditions of equalized stats, RWBY has a better chance of winning? Or do you think that Nero could pull through even with the disadvantages he faces from not being physically superior? Let me know in the comments down below. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Right, as always, I would like to give a quick shout out to the users 3topicsgamer, the YouTuber who inspired this series, who just might be coming back for one last season if he can reach this milestone by the end of December. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. I want another season. Another good friend of this channel, Winter Ghost, who just put out a video going over Nezuko from Demon Slayer versus Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and another stats equalized fight. And once again, a newcomer to this series, King Cameron, who by the time this video is out should have his match of Blake Belladonna versus Akame from Akame ga Kill out. Right? With all that, I'm Ray932 and I will see you next time.